I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon. This is episode number 200. Yes, 200. And today, we've got a show that lives up to that big number as we've pulled together 3 of the very best DIY whitetail bow hunters I know for an in-depth panel discussion on what it takes to become a truly great deer hunter. All right, folks, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today is our 200th episode. Yeah. I launched the Wired Hunt podcast, I think it was in the spring of 2014. So we're approaching our 4th year and doing 1 episode a week. And then during the season, doing 2 episodes a week, we've slowly made our way to 200. So first and foremost, Dan, thank you for being with me for a lot of those. This has been fun.
Yeah, dude. I didn't realize what this was going to entail, and now that you say 4 years, it makes me look back and to the shed hunt that we had, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, dude, I'm gonna start a podcast. Do you want to be the co-host? And I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. And here we are today.
A lot has changed, huh?
That's right. A lot has changed.
Yeah. And when we had our 100th episode, and this was a couple years ago, I guess, for that episode, we did a panel discussion with 3 different kind of big-name deer hunters. So we had Lee Lakosky from the Crush TV, we had Dr. Grant Woods from Growing Deer TV, and we had Bill Winke from Midwest Whitetail. And my idea for that podcast, and what we did was we had all 3 of them on, and then I asked them a handful of really, sometimes often debated questions related to deer hunting, and then got the 3 of them to offer all of their own perspectives and debate a little bit on all those things. And that turned out to be a pretty cool one. So I thought now, fast forward another 100 episodes later, to do something similar. So today we're going to do another panel discussion, but instead of having a bunch of big-name deer hunters, I wanted to get together a collection of some of the very best deer hunters that fly under the radar. So today we've got 3 absolute killer DIY deer hunters that are going to answer some of the same questions that we asked the guys back in episode 100, but we're going to get a DIY perspective. And then I'm also going to ask, we're going to get some different questions in there too that are relevant to the way these guys hunt. But all 3 of these guys hunt a lot of heavily pressured ground. They hunt public ground. They hunt stuff they got permission on, small pieces, public pieces, and they do it the way that all the rest of us are trying to do it as well. So I think it's going to be very interesting, very relatable. And so who we've got in the show here, Dan, are 2 guys who've been on the podcast in the past and 1 new guest. So we have Andy May with us again, and Andy joined us down in New Orleans for our live podcast at the Quality Deer Management Association convention this past summer. So Andy's back, and he's one of the very best hunters I know, definitely one of the very best hunters in Michigan I know of. So he's back. And then we've got Joe Elsinger, who's out in your home state, Dan, out in Iowa. He joined us last spring, I think, and that was a really, really great conversation, so I'm excited to pick his brain more. And then finally, we're also going to be joined by a guy by the name of Jesse Coots, and he comes from New York. So we've got guys from all across the country, and they've also all hunted in a lot of other states too. So they're going to bring a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different ideas, and generally I'm just really stoked for this conversation. But before we get those guys on, we have another exciting thing to talk about on episode 200. And it's kind of cool that this falls on the 200th episode because it's kind of a special episode for a lot of reasons. Dan, I'm a dad.
You're a dad, dude.
It happened.
I think the dynamic of this entire podcast is going to change now.
Yeah.
Because you know how, especially when it comes to, I think it's perfect, right? We have on the 100th episode, we had the big names on, right? And not a lot of people can relate to how they hunt. But now we have these three guys on who are the DIY, they're just like me and you. They have full-time jobs, right? They go out and they're on public ground or permission private, and they go, the grinders, right? And it's kind of relatable in a way because now you're going to slowly start relating to what I'm going through as a dad with a kid of your own.
Yeah, a lot of stuff's coming full circle. And for anyone who's followed this podcast since the beginning, I think it has been an interesting evolution to see you and me, grow as deer hunters from 2014 till now, and then also now following us as we've each started our own families and how that's changing things. We've got to document that a lot over the past few years with you, and now that begins with me. Hopefully it's going to be a good thing. Potentially everyone's going to stop listening because they hate hearing us talk about kids. We had someone slam the kid talk again on an iTunes review, so it's only going to get worse. But But all joking aside, it's something that a lot of people go through, right? I mean, this is part of life for a lot of people, and we're gonna live it and we're gonna share it. And yeah, man, 2 weeks early, my little guy came 2 weeks early. His name is Everett Daniel Kenyon, and I know. As much as I love you, buddy, we didn't name him after you, but
right.
But we'll let you believe that. He's named after his grandpa. My wife's dad's name is Dan. But yeah, man, from here on out, you can treat him like he's named after you and spoil him and take him hunting on all your Iowa properties, please.
Right. How pissed off would you be if when he starts getting old enough to hunt by himself, I give him an open invitation on the properties that I hunt and not you?
You bastard.
He starts laying down like 150s, his first couple years of hunting, and you're like, hey man, I'm here if you need me.
That's probably what's gonna happen. But I'd be happy for him.
Right. So I got a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
I mean, you're living this dad life now, and we're kind of, only a month apart from my youngest, a couple months apart from my youngest to your, I got a 4-month-old and you have basically a newborn.
Yep.
And so what I want to know is having another human life in your life that you're 100% responsible for, like this, was it as big of a shock as you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, man. I mean, everyone tells you like your whole life changes, and in a matter of seconds, everything else won't matter as much, and all this stuff. You've been telling me these things forever, and everybody else has been telling me them, and I'm always like, yeah. But it is amazing. As soon as it all happened and he showed up, everything does change, and my whole world has changed. I mean, how I live my life already in the last 2 weeks has changed. What I worry about has changed overnight. The things I'm excited about or looking forward to have changed. So yeah, no doubt about it. Stuff's different. It's awesome. I'm I still feel pretty confident that I'm going to be able to continue to enjoy all the same things we did in the past, but just in a different way probably.
Yeah.
And I'm just so excited to share all those things with him now.
Right.
So I'm rediscovering sleep. For a while I lost it, but we're figuring out a system, so I'm sleeping again. I'm slowly starting to feel comfortable. For a long time I was like in nonstop paranoia, like, is he breathing? Is he okay? Is this okay? Is that okay? So we're starting to figure that out a little bit. He's super stinking cute.
Yeah.
I always, when you and me went on our elk hunting trip, I don't know, this was like 2 or 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
Like the first day or second day, you were already like talking about how much you missed your daughter, and all that stuff. And I was like, oh man, he's just been gone for 2 or 3 days. Like, man up, Dan. But I can already like see, like I've already mentioned to Kylie, like, man, I can already imagine like when I'm taking off on my trips, how much I'm gonna miss him. Because already, like, I work in my office for like an hour or two, and then I'm like, I just got to go out and see him for a little bit. So it's pretty special. I'm excited for a lot of cool stuff to come, and he's awesome. He's awesome. He's my little buddy, and everything's different now.
Absolutely. I tell you what, man, there's going to be a shift someday, and I keep have to telling, I have to keep telling myself that as frustrating as kids are, and as much as they piss you off and cock block you, and like all these things, that you'll look back someday 10, 15 years from now and wish that you still, like you could go back and relive those days. And I haven't necessarily hit, I don't think, those days yet, just because my family is still in the growing stage. Well, hopefully we're done growing, but there's
ways to ensure that, Dan.
Oh, hey, I got to get some of those 9-finger Chronicle checks coming in, and I can guarantee you that when they do, it's snippy snip time
snip.
from old Dan Johnson.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea, man. Otherwise, I worry you're going to have like the Brady Bunch pretty soon.
I wouldn't worry about it. Like me and Mark had this discussion before we started recording about quote unquote getting action. Him post baby, and me with 3 kids. And like right now in my life, I don't have to worry about getting my wife pregnant again.
Yeah, I guess new phase in life. New phase in life.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, man. I've caught myself already like, wishing, I can't wait till he can walk around, or I can't wait till I can take him hunting, or I can't wait till he can hold his head up on his own. But then I also need to like remind myself, just enjoy the right now. Just enjoy this moment, because
Right.
everybody tells you it goes by so fast. You're going to blink and one day they're grown up and gone. So I'm going to try to do a good job of just soaking in right now, enjoying who he is right at this moment and all these little moments, and that's pretty special on its own. So I got a lot to learn.
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
Yeah, we all do. It's continuous learning too. It never really stops.
Yeah. And I will say one other thing, and we talk about this a lot, and I think I can already feel it mattering more now, and that being the responsibility we hold as hunters in making sure that this way of life is still around, that there are still wildlife and wild places, public lands, healthy, ecosystems, clean air, clean water, all that kind of stuff that we've talked about that matters so much. Well, now that there's a little guy here that I'm responsible for, and that, is going to be around here hopefully long after I'm gone, I'm just like thinking about that stuff even more. Like, I need to make sure that I leave a place that's better for him and not worse. So I can see that is only going to grow in my mind, I guess, as the years progress. So if there's anything that people can expect to hear more of in the coming months and years, they're going to hear more kid stories. They're going to hear more about how important it is to protect our way of life and our wildlife and our places. And they're going to hear more about bad reviews on iTunes about our kid talks. So there's all that to look forward to.
Well, I tell you what, it's also a little bit about like a thought process change, right? When back in the day, I used to be all about big antlers, right? Oh, big antlers is what matters. Well, I think we need to change that. And I know I've changed on it. I mean, I don't know the hunting industry, the hunters in this community needs to change and stop putting, I don't know, maybe this is coming out of left field, but like we have to change the way we think about how we look at success. And I think that needs to be changed first and foremost before we try to do anything else, because it's going to be a tough battle when we're trying to get other people into hunting and all they see is giant bucks being killed. And they don't want to go out and do it because just like the youth today, unless it's easy, they don't want to do it.
Yeah. Or on the other hand, if people just hear about all these deer hunters talk about is how they're trying to kill this 200-inch buck or 190-inch buck or trophy buck, trophy this, trophy that, I think that turns off a lot of people too, because the perception of what quote unquote trophy hunting is or means is something that most non-hunters are pretty turned off by. So if we're trying to grow the hunting community, trophy hunting is definitely not a message that's going to resonate with them. Right. Now, how people define trophy hunting, of course, is very different. But I think your point is well heard. For me, it's always been, and this could be like a half-hour discussion, so I'm going to try not to get too far into this, but for me as a deer hunter, it's always been, I'm very goal-oriented. So I always like to push myself to achieve something or to strive for something different. So, sometimes that's been like an antler score, sometimes that's been an age, sometimes that's been just an experience. But I think having goals, that's not a bad thing. But I think, pinning everything just on an arbitrary inch amount or something like that and determining the worth of a hunt or the worth of a deer or something like that just by a score, that does seem to really take a lot out of it. So, I'm never going to hate on someone who pays attention to that stuff because I do pay attention to it. But there's a lot, there's so much more to it. And we need to, at least I personally feel like it's important for myself to celebrate all the aspects of it. Because you're absolutely right. I think that too much of an obsession with that, which there certainly is not a good thing for the future of deer hunting. And I think even for just for enjoyment of it, I think it can be pretty negative too. So it's finding that balance, right? And enjoying all aspects of hunting, respecting all aspects of the hunt. And, the quote unquote big deer, that'll come if you focus on all these other details and try to do things the right way. You'll have that kind of success if that's what you're looking for.
Absolutely, man. Let's see here. I got a question for you, right? I mean, how much time do we have left before we got to cut it?
I don't know. Here. I mean, people listening might be saying no, none. But what do you got to ask me now? We'll see how far we can go. 200,
right? That's a big number. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot of podcasts. Do you have any that stick out in your mind that are just like, oh man, this is one of my favorite ones, and I could go back and listen to it over and over.
Well, I think the Shane Mahoney episode will always be one of my favorites because he's just a legend, a guy I could listen to talk for hours, and that conversation was just a topic that I'm always fascinated by. We talked about the history of hunting in North America and kind of our ancestors, and then the history of like conservation and hunters and public lands and all of that, in the 1900s. That was fascinating. And then he also talked about the future of hunting and what we need to be thinking about as far as how we represent ourselves, how we communicate about hunting. And those are all things that are kind of near and dear to my heart. And Shane just does such a great job of verbalizing all that. So that's definitely a favorite. The Mark Drury episode number 63, that still stands out as just like, I don't know, he so succinctly spoke to so many different little topics related to deer hunting and the details of, the things he's seen that drive deer activity and different stuff that I just geek out about. So many people have loved that one too. That's still a personal favorite of mine, and Mark is just a wealth of information. I always enjoy hearing from him. He's got a great name too. What else? I don't know. Those two stand out. The one we had I had my wife and then my buddy Corey's wife on. That was a funny one way back in the first year.
Right.
I don't know. These are the ones that are popping up in my mind. Anything for you that stands out?
So I was scrolling through the episodes today, and I'm going to go all the way back to episode number 12. Okay. And that's the life of a whitetail bum.
Oh, yeah.
And it's basically just a topic about, how guys like us are just in it 365 days a year, right? I mean, that's all we think about. That's all we care about. And I think everybody should go back to that episode and check that out. It's only like 28 minutes.
Yep, that was a short one, but it was kind of a neat little look at the life of crazy people like you and me, and our listeners. That's a good one from way back. That's a way back episode. I think if you haven't went back and listened to some of the old episodes, there really is some good stuff. Now, you and me, we probably sounded like bumbling idiots, but I think we had some quality content from guests. I mean, we had a great episode from Jeff Sturgis on food plots. The original Dan Infalt interview, episode number 3, that was packed with good stuff. We had a good Jeff Danker episode. There was Craig Doherty. We had a good episode with him talking about both habitat management and hunting. We've just been fortunate to be able to talk to a lot of interesting people, and it's been cool to be able to have all these conversations. And also you and me get to benefit from it. I think we've both grown as deer hunters, become hopefully, a lot better. It hasn't always translated into more field tags, but I definitely feel like a more accomplished, a more well-rounded hunter. And I know that not every year, but most years translates to actual meat in the freezer. So It's just exciting to see where things are going to go. Exciting stuff to come.
And I tell you what, as much as I love having the guests on this podcast, the listener gets a lot of great content out of that. But from a selfish standpoint, I gotta love just the bullshit sessions that we do. It's just me and you.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I love to talk about deer. And I don't know, man. It's that on top of, I'll tell you what, and I owe you a big thank you for, number one, back at that shed hunt, asking me to be a part of this. I love, and I know I don't get to hop on absolutely every episode just because of scheduling conflicts with, 3 kids and work and whatnot. But I love talking about deer, and I don't know. I'm thankful that I get to be a part of this, and it's helped me with the 9 Fingers and all 9 Finger Chronicles and all that stuff. So I owe you a big thank you.
Well, hey man, you are very welcome, and I appreciate you being a part of this too. And you've brought a one of a kind thing to the show that nobody else could. And for that,
didn't I see like an application out there for co-host wanted Wired to Hunt?
No, that is a job opening that we will not be filling. Hopefully,
I got to be tenured by now.
Yeah, I think you're locked in. As long as your heart's still ticking and you're willing to do it, I think you're stuck BSing with me every week for the rest of our lives, Dan. So
there we go.
So there you go. And we probably should wrap this up because I think our conversation with our guest is going to be a long one. So I suppose, though, for our 200th episode, it should be expected that it'll be a long one. But we'll be 5 of us on this, so it's going to be a lot of voices, a lot of ideas, a lot of different perspectives. And I think that is probably fitting for the Wired Hunt podcast here, 200 episodes in. So, Dan, let's take a quick break for our Sitka Gear story of the day, and then we will get Joe, Andy, and Jesse on the line.
For this week's Sitka story, we're joined by Sitka Ambassador Kyle Hansen, who tells us about getting his first turkey with a bow.
All right, spring of 2017, I decided that I wanted to try and get my first ever spring turkey with a bow. Having just picked up the bow a couple months prior, I decided that it was going to be bow or bust. I figured I was going to have to hunt from start to finish of this season and most likely go home empty-handed as I'd done before with a shotgun. On day 2 in the field, I ended up arrowing my first tom ever. He came into the field at about 7 a.m. with some hens and started his way over to me. When he reached 30 yards, my maximum effective range on that day, I let one fly, hitting him square and finishing with one lethal shot. And just like that, my spring turkey season was a wrap.
On Kyle's hunt, he was wearing Sitka's Fanatic hoodie. If you'd like to create a Sitka story of your own, or to learn more about Sitka's technical hunting apparel, visit sitkagear.com.
All right, and real quick here before we get to this interview, I just have to say that pulling off a 5-person conference call podcast interview over the internet, it's a little tricky, and unfortunately, I'm telling you this because we had some technical difficulties with this one, and someday if the stars align and I make it big and I all of a sudden have the funds to fly everybody in here in person to do these interviews here, that'll make things a lot easier. That'd be really nice, but until then, I'm going to have to keep hillbilly rigging it like I am right now and do this across phone lines and the internet. And so what happens here, unfortunately, is that Dan got dropped off the line mysteriously, so Dan's gone. And then we also have some weird little audio issues, some weird noises occasionally, some weird clicks and pops. It might be just a touch distracting at times, but it won't be so bad that you can't take in all of the information and good stuff that these guys have to offer. And man, the perspectives that these 3 hunters share, I enjoyed so much. I really do think everyone can learn something from these guys in this conversation. So I'm really excited for you to enjoy it. So apologies again for a little bit of these audio issues. Thanks for your patience, and enough of me. Let's get right to it. All right, with us now on the line is all sorts of people. we have got Joe Elsinger, Andy May, and Jesse Coots, and I'm not going to ask them each to introduce themselves. I'm actually going to try to throw things around here a little bit. Since we're doing this panel discussion, and since it's all kind of started from an idea that my buddy Andy had, I want Andy to kick us off here because, Mr. May, you had this idea of putting together these DIY deer hunter profiles, and you went out and found these different guys that are just tremendous deer hunters from across the country that do it the hard way, and you went out and you interviewed them, and you put together these great blog posts for us. And so that's kind of why we're here now today, because all 3 of you guys on the line now have been a part of that profile series. And Andy, since you found a lot of these guys or knew a lot of these guys, I was hoping you could just introduce us briefly to who else we have on the line here, to Joe and Jesse. So can you give us a quick Cliff Notes on who Joe is and then who Jesse is?
Yeah. Oh, man. These 2 guys, I'll tell you. Joe Elsinger, he frequents a forum called The Hunting Beast that I also get on once in a while, and I think everybody knows, the Hunting Beast it's known for being a group of hardcore hunters, mostly DIY type hunters, lots of public land, lots of high pressured private land, just the hardcore guys that just live and breathe this stuff. And Joe is, he's a standout over there. Just his experience and his knowledge of whitetails, and just how far he takes his scouting and his preparation. It's unmatched. It actually blows my mind, and I put in a lot of time. Joe just he doesn't leave anything to chance. He makes his own success, and it just kind of blows my mind every year how successful he is. 2, 3, sometimes $4 a year, doing it the hard way, and just a guy I really look up to. He's inspiring. Switching over to Jesse, same thing. I met Jesse through another forum many years ago, and I messaged him because he had a $4 season, and I remember a comment that he wrote, and it said, he was able to kill his last 4 target bucks on the first day of the season, or something along those lines. I was like, man, I gotta pick this guy's brain. So I messaged him, and we kind of hit it off, and we've been buddies ever since. And Jesse is one of those guys that, he's as hardcore as they come. It doesn't matter if it's whitetail, elk, mule deer. If he goes somewhere, there's an animal's going to die. It's going to be a good one. And he's just, one of the most efficient killers, if not the most efficient killer that I know. He's like me. He's got kids, doesn't get a ton of time out in the woods, but he gets it done every single year on multiple animals and with very little time spent in the woods.
So now that Andy has fluffed you guys up really nicely, Joe, Joe, do you want to give your perspective on Andy, since you had done his intro for the DIY Deer Hunter profile on the website?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. First of all, he's making me blush a little bit. That's not very nice. Andy and I have known each other kind of, through the Hunting Beast forum, and we've gotten to know each other a little bit outside of that lately. And I've watched him for years, and he's one of those guys that he makes it look easy, and everybody knows it's not easy. And he would freely admit it's not easy for him to do it, but he finds success so quickly that it almost seems like, wow, like he's not even trying. But behind the scenes, there's no one really more hardcore than Andy. He lives, breathes hunting, particularly deer hunting, 365 days a year. So, and that's what it takes to get done. He's always thinking about an angle, thinking about a buck, thinking about a way to get in and get the job done. So, and that starts the day after he killed a buck the last season, I think. So, it's pretty impressive. And I have to say I'm pretty honored to be considered a guest with these two guys, because I'm just an Iowa farm kid, so I freely admit that I live in a target-rich environment. I take pride in being a detailed hunter, but I live in a target-rich environment compared to out east or in Michigan. So I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say, that's for sure.
Yeah. And if you feel humbled to be in this company, imagine me, who hasn't done anything compared to you guys. And Dan was so intimidated by the three of you that he just dropped off the call. So so the way it's going to work,
now he can crack redheaded jokes the whole time.
Exactly. He can't defend himself. And what I want to do from here then is kind of approach this like a panel discussion. So I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to point it to one of you and get your thoughts, and we'll just go down the line. And you guys can give your own perspectives, or you can, disagree with what the other people said, or add on whatever you want. And we'll kind of try to move through a bunch of questions relatively rapid fire style to cover as many different topics as we can. But if there's something where you guys, really vehemently want to argue something out, feel free to do that. But these are some questions that I think will be particularly relevant to you guys and how you hunt. And then there's also some questions here that I asked back on our 100th episode when we did our last panel discussion. And our last panel discussion was with Bill Winke, Dr. Grant Woods, and Lee Lukoski. So those three guys answered some of these questions, and they duked it out between themselves. And now I want to ask some of the same questions to you guys and have you duke it out. And then it'll be kind of interesting to see how your three perspectives compare to their three perspectives, kind of our big-name TV folks, under-the-radar DIY deer hunter folks, and I think it's an interesting comparison. So that's kind of what we're going to do. And the first question, though, I want to say we're going to send to Jesse, and it's this, Jesse. I want to know, for you, what's more important? Is it scouting or the actual hunts? Give me an answer and why.
Sounds good, Mark, and I'll just touch base on what Joe said. I'm honored to be a part of this panel, so thanks for having me, man.
Of course.
That's kind of a no-brainer. I think any serious guy is gonna go ahead, I would think, and say scouting is the name of the game. It's kind of like training as a wrestler. If you skip your whole training season, and go right to your first match, you're going to get pummeled. If you train all preseason and go into your first match, you're going to walk through it. And bow hunting is no different. You got to take your scouting serious, not just riding around on a four-wheeler, but really using your head and scouting. And I think every state has a different scouting technique, so you got to take that type of thing into account. But yeah, scouting's the name of the game in my book. I scout probably 80% of the time and hunt 20% of the time.
Okay. Joe, what would you add?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I put it this way. Scouting season is 365 days a year. In season, out of season, you can scout. Other than,
That's right.
some public areas don't let you on other than certain times. You still cyber scout. You can think about stuff. You can look at old patterns of old trail cam photos. That's all scouting in my book. Hunting season, yeah, it might be a couple months long, but still, scouting season's a lot longer. And you really have to enjoy scouting, I guess, to enjoy the success of kind of the DIY style. I think that's really important. Everybody that I talk to that is fairly successful doing it themselves, they love to scout. Like, scouting is just as fun, if not more fun, than the actual hunt. And that helps you get out there, week after week. So that's what I think.
All right, and Andy, how would you approach this question?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to sound repetitive, but I mean, it's absolutely scouting. I mean, that's your preparation. That's how you figure out, what deer are there, what deer you're going to go after. You're trying to, find out tendencies that maybe individual deer have and plan for a kill. I mean, I'd rather be able to scout 50 days and hunt 10 days rather than be able to hunt every day of the season. I mean, I'm going to be more successful with those 50 days of scouting. In fact, I remember, I think it was that a few years ago, Jesse, I think he killed 3 or 4 bucks, the big mature bucks, big, Pope and Young plus type deer on 9 sits, and then a couple years ago, I killed 6 Pope and Young bucks on 19 sits.
Jeez.
And, we both have, and Joe too, you got families with kids. I mean, we don't want to be gone the whole hunting season. I mean, it's selfish, for us to kind of, chase our dreams per se. So, we spread it out over the year and we prepare, just through scouting. And it's a year-round deal. There's something you can do every month of the year that's going to help you in the fall.
Yeah. And I got to
And
admit.
to add to that, if I may.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say that to add to that, the scouting is so much easier. When you're going hunting, you have to be out early. You have to get in ahead of time. You've got to be sneaky. When you're scouting, you are, at least for me, I can jog out to a couple different places, glass in the last half-hour light, and see everything I need to see. I can be up way before I have to go to work and do all my glassing and then still be to work and only glass for a half an hour. You can do that every day. So it's not a huge investment of time. So, and that's how you can do it in different states too. If you get it figured out, even if you can only go scout a state for 3 or 4 days, it's those crucial first half hour, last half hour. All your reconnaissance, it's not a big investment of time.
Yeah. It's a great.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The flexibility, that is key with, I got 2 little kids too. So, and family obligations, they take precedence over hunting. I'm extraordinarily, I'm very passionate about hunting, but being able to get out, I got 2 hours. Okay, I want to hit, that public area that I've been meaning to scout, or you block out, like I like to hunt up in kind of northern Wisconsin too. Block out 1 3-day weekend. That's what I get in the spring for scouting up there, boots on the ground. Everything else has to be remote, but it's flexible. I pick the weekend,
Yeah. And I gotta admit, I kind of knew that you guys were gonna give me this answer, so I've been leading you. and given that's the case, what I'm most interested in, because I knew that you guys are so obsessive with scouting, and because I kind of am guessing that's what really sets you guys apart. What I'm really interested in is the detail, how you actually scout. I think when most people think scouting, they think, oh, a guy walks through the woods a couple times, sees some rubs, sees some scrapes, sets a stand there or something. That's kind of like your generic entry level scouting session. Andy, can you start us out by describing in detail how to scout like an expert, like how to do that next level scouting? What is the scouting that you do that is making you so disproportionately successful compared to the guy that just goes out and looks at some rubs and scrapes a couple times?
Oh man, it's kind of hard to narrow that down to a short time frame. You could write a book on it, but like Joe said, it's a year-round thing. So right after the season starts, right after the season ends is a great time to start. January for Michigan. I'll get right out there when there's still snow. The season just ended, and I'll walk all my hunting areas. I'm looking for winter bedding, travel routes like to food sources, kind of monitoring what the crop rotations were, trying to find bucks that survive that, I might be able to chase next year and zone in on. And all that to relate, to future late season hunting. That's, for me, that's a really important time frame, because I don't want to be a rut guy, and I don't want to be just an early season guy. I want to be able to be effective all year round. So, you can't beat right when the season's done. You get that most recent information. Most guys kind of hang it up for a while, but you got to get right back out there and you can get some information. So, when the snow melts for me, I get right out there. I'm looking for, that's when all the sign is like still really visible. It's before green up, every trail, every scrape, every rub, the beds are very visible. That's when I'm looking for like individual buck beds. I'm looking for doe bedding, intersecting trails, scrapes, rub concentrations, all that stuff. And I'm just trying to, put all the puzzle pieces together for like more effective rut sits, for the next fall. And I try to find a lot of them so that, I can fill up a whole, if I get, 10 sits during the rut or, 6 sits, I want high percentage spots. So, I'm looking for the best of the best types spot within the spot. Those really good spots where you have a lot of things going on that are in your favor. And then I go, like kind of May and June, I tone it back. It's a lot of family time. I start really hammering my archery at that time, getting dialed in. And then, once, kind of summer comes, August, September, that's when I'm trying to find those, those early season patterns, a buck to go after early in the season. So I'm running some trail cameras. I'm doing a lot of glassing, checking fields for, large tracks, that sort of thing. What I mentioned before was, I think Joe has a similar strategy, but I try to find, 5 or 6 bucks in Michigan to go after, because, I'm going to screw up for sure. I'm going to make some mistakes on a few of them. And, you get the competition on these areas I hunt are so high, it's inevitable that other hunters are going to push deer out. So I usually, if I can find, 5 or 6 bucks to go after, then I can usually typically find success.
So on that question, Andy, you mentioned that you typically have 5 or 6 different bucks you try to find in a given year. And this kind of goes to something I've thought a lot about. A lot of the best guys that I know, guys that don't own their own land, guys that are finding spots either by permission or in public, a lot of the people I talk to do like what you do. They have a bunch of different places to hunt. So how many different properties are you working through to try to find these $5 or $6, here in Michigan? I mean, do you have 5 properties? Do you have 15 properties that you have permission on, or public spots? How many different spots do you go into a year usually that you can say, okay, these are my options?
Well, I'm always adding, spots. There's some, a lot of people know kind of where I hunt. I don't want to give it away too much, but, there's definitely some spots I have permission on. And it's spots that are shared with other hunters, guys I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where the landowners let people hunt. I got some spots like that. There's some public spots. There's some spots that are private land open to public hunting. But I'm also always trying to gain new ground in one way or another. So I knock on a lot of doors. I'm always kind of picking away at new public land spots. And some of the areas that I used to hunt a lot, specifically the public areas, they got hammered by EHD back in 2012, and they're still not. I had to give up on them for several years because there just wasn't any deer, or not a single thing that I could locate worth going after. So I don't know, to answer your question, there's a lot of them. I'd probably say that I try to scout and monitor, 12 to 15 different areas. Yeah. And some of those are huge chunks of, public land. Some are tiny little private pieces. I hunt one piece that's 1 acre. So it's it's everything in between. So I try to find anywhere that I can hunt around here. There's so many guys, you kind of take what you can get.
Yeah. Okay. So Joe, how about first question? How many different parcels or properties do you typically try to have as options, and then can you detail your scouting and what makes your scouting next level?
Yep. Yeah, Andy hit a lot of the points I would hit. Makes my summary a little shorter, but right now I'm right around a dozen pieces of public land that I hunt, and that's my passion, hunting it for my bow tag in my home state of Iowa, is public land. I for my general either sex tag, I have a small acreage around my house, and Iowa landowners get a landowner's tag, but that's not really where my passion is. It's public land, and going out where anybody else can go. I can go whenever I want and scout, and it's probably they range from 10 to 20 acres up to 1,000 acres or more. But really, Iowa doesn't have that much public land. I'm fortunate to live in a part of the state that has more than other parts, but it's still not that much. And I'm a little envious of guys who have 10,000 acres of public out their back door. That'd be pretty cool. But so I'm hitting around a dozen. I also try to seek out and scout at least one new parcel a year, one or two. That's kind of basically public land never stays the same. And Andy kind of mentioned this. You may have EHD, you might have changes in hunting pressure. A lot of the differences that I see, because some of the smaller parcels, if depends if there's acorns or not. If there's much use by deer, they may be over here, and then another year there may be hardly any deer because they're focused on crop fields, and surrounding private properties. If it's a travel corridor and there's not good bedding there. So it's very important to have, my rule of thumb is kind of twice as many spots as I could hunt in a season, and both, twice as many areas and twice as many setups in those areas as I could ever hunt in a season. And I'm focused on playing the long game, kind of stacking the odds in my favor. So I'm constantly sorting what are the best areas, the highest odds that, may have target bucks that I'm really interested in that I think are killable versus other ones that don't look so hot, and I'm only hitting the top half or the top third on any given year. I'm still kind of watching those other areas. I can put boots on the ground a couple times, and I may run a trail camera or two to see how deer are moving and what's around. But that's kind of how I really try to stack the odds in my favor. And then I know mentioned kind of a scouting routine. Andy hit most of the good points. One thing I would definitely add, and I know he does this too, I haven't talked to him, but in-season scouting. So basically, the minute I kill, I tag out, I'm like switch to scouting mode. If I had, say, any cameras set up, like watching for target bucks, I might adjust those. Maybe I might adjust them, might not, depending on where they are. But I'll set them in spots. I really like to set cameras in spots, leave them soak the whole season, and just observe in really kind of high impact spots. Don't check them. I'll leave them for months on end, observe natural deer movement, and then I can review those photos and really get a very detailed understanding of what those deer are doing. Just about every spot I have ever done that with, I see distinct favorite deer trends according to weather, maybe hunting pressure and other factors, different food sources lighting up, but particularly weather, wind, temperatures. Deer use certain areas based on certain conditions. I am absolutely certain of that. On top of hunting pressure effects and everything like that. So, the rest of the in-season scouting, the sign is red hot. You can see it as it gets laid down. You can get a jump start on that spring scouting if you tag out. Like my favorite time to hunt is October, and the vast majority of the time I tag out in October. And I'm switching immediately to, okay, what do I want to look at for next year? And then letting those trail cameras soak with intent over the kind of the winter months. Like if you got a big, thick snowpack on the ground, it's not ideal scouting out there. That's when I play catch up. I just actually, it's February, it's the second week of February right now, and I just finally caught up with all my trail cam photos from last fall, So I had a number of cameras out just sitting there. Finally picked up the last couple, and I've been looking at those photos and figuring out how deer are using those spots.
Awesome. Jesse, what would you add as far as how many different places you have access to and your scouting?
Yeah, so obviously those guys gave great answers. And one thing I would point out, all three of us, Joe, Andy, and myself, live in completely different geographic areas. And therefore, our answers are, I actually might give different answers than them and not disagree, but my answers would be different because I'm hunting a completely different topographical, everything's different. Like Andy had said, scouting and looking for mass amounts of deer in the winter, I would agree with, I'd love to pound it right now. This is the one time of year that you can cover ground and go places that you should not go because anything you bump, it doesn't matter. They're coming back. They're going wherever the food source is. Now, when I pound ground right now, I'm looking for sign that was November sign or October sign, or, obviously shed hunting. But I personally think deer are, this sounds corny, but they're kind of like men. When they're young, they're all over the place. They're goofing around. They're with all the, they're with the tribe. They're with the herd. When they get to be older, which is what we're hunting, when I'm in my 40s, I don't really go out to the bars anymore. I'm not traveling with the masses. I kind of like to be alone. I like to be out in my own little area in life, and big bucks are the same way. So when I'm covering ground this time of year, I'm not looking for tons of tracks. I'm looking for a giant. I'm looking for a big track. And here, you can bump them. It's great this time of year, and it's not a big deal. But here, everything is going to change. So bucks that are where they are right now, I might never see them in that spot. Everything is food source here. We get a lot of snow, and it's really cold. And then in the summer, it's going to be in the 90s. So everything really swings. So I'm not afraid to walk all over the place. And personally, I'm not looking for big mass quantities of deer. Those guys nailed it. I'm looking for next year's kill this year. And when I scout year-round, obviously, you got to study these food sources, and you've got to remember what happened last year when the soybeans turned, all the bucks disappeared. Well, they went to the soybeans, so you have to play back on your knowledge from years in the past. And really, I don't take any notes. When I was a kid, I took a lot of notes, and then I found that I never go back and read them because I remember every buck from every year. When they switched gears, when they disappeared, when they showed up. I literally sit in my tree stand and think about that stuff. And I think Joe had mentioned that, just thinking and spending time scouting, just thinking about scouting and thinking about hunting, remembering the change of things. Scouting, the one thing I would say those guys didn't mention is, at least for me, I glass like a maniac. I stay way away from my hunting spots. Even when I'm scouting, in the winter is about the only time I really walk through anything. Having good optics and having a good tripod for your optics to be on, and knowing that 15-minute window when animals are going to move or where they're going to show up, you have to learn that stuff. And it sounds weird, but once you kind of figure things out, it's almost like you have a sixth sense. No matter what state you go to, you'll see something and you'll know, I need to be here tonight at 6:45 at sunset because I got to see what comes out of that corner. Just picking up that sixth sense and making mental notes in your head from years in the past. I'm not a big camera guy either, to be honest with you. I like what Joe said about putting them up and leaving them. And I have cameras that are literally sitting out there that I put out in October, and I still haven't picked them up yet. I'm sure the batteries are dead, but I'll know what was there, and I'll know what time of day they moved and stuff. But some guys check them every week, and they wonder why these deer disappeared, and you're spooking them, So
you talked
that
about,
would be my take.
You talked about glassing. What times of year are you doing that glassing? Are you doing that all through the entire year and monitoring deer from a distance at all times of the year, or is that just in season from observation stands? Or can you elaborate on that a little bit? But before we do get to the answer to these questions from Jesse, let's take a quick pause here for our Whitetail Properties segment of the day, and Spencer will get that started for us right now.
This week with Whitetail Properties, we are joined by Andrew Schultz, a land specialist out of Illinois. And Andrew is going to be telling us about projecting the future of the land market in the Midwest.
I wish I was able to tell the future, but all I can go off of is my clients and what I hear from people around me, and obviously my experience since being in this business. And the one thing that I seem to hear over and over again is that buyers and sellers wish they would have bought sooner, and they wish they would have bought more. And the reason for that is because if you look back at the history of land, it's appreciated so much over the years, and we expect it to continue appreciating because they're not making any more land. So there's a limited supply of this stuff, and it's in high demand. And people who have never owned land before, they're coming out and they're buying it because they understand that they're not making any more of it. So can I predict 5 years from now, 10, 20? Not exactly, but I can predict, or it's likely, that land is going to continue to appreciate, and you're going to wish that you would have bought more of it and bought it sooner.
If you'd like to learn more and to see the properties that Andrew currently has listed for sale, visit whitetailproperties.com/Schultz. That's SCHULTZ.
Yeah, so I glass nonstop. In fact, glassing, at least in the East where I come from, it seems like nobody glasses. I have a lot of spots that are exactly what you said. They're observation stands. You couldn't kill a deer out of half my stands if your life depended on it with a bow. A lot of them are 30, 40 feet high, but I can see all the way around me, literally a mile. I mean, a lot of times I'm glassing 3-4 fields away, or 3 or 4 hedgerows away, or and a lot of times, even if I only had 10 minutes, if my wife, I have a wife and 3 kids and run my own business. So free time is 10 minutes to me is awesome. So if I can get out of here, hit the road, and hit at least one of my spots in glass, that's 5 minutes of knowledge that I got that I know nobody else is doing. So that's huge. And having very good optics, is important, and having a very good tripod. If you're from the ground, having steady glass, it's amazing. It'll make marginal binoculars look better. So buy a good tripod and buy a good tripod head, if that's all you can afford. And then someday when you can swing a little more money, get yourself some high-end optics, and you will. I think my Swarovskis, when I bought them, they were like $1,800, and everybody thought I was nuts. But they're like 15 years old. They're still amazing, and they're probably worth $2,400 now. And I would have bought 3 or 4 other sets of junk $300 binoculars. So having good optics, I pick up on so much stuff that I know that people aren't seeing, and it's really like cheating. I almost feel like a cheater with my optics, because it's you can look through the woods with them. It's great.
That's a great tip. I would reiterate one other kind of tip that you mentioned is tracks. That's something that I didn't really mention, but it's a huge component of what I'm doing all year long. I'm looking at tracks, and I know I've got some comments, like some people are very skeptical that you can ID an individual buck's tracks, but I have been looking at the hooves of big bucks for quite a while now, and a big, fully mature buck is not very common anywhere, on anywhere that gets any significant hunting pressure. There's not many of them, and usually their tracks stand out. They're busy pawing and fighting and, chasing does, and they're a lot of times chipped up, cracked up, whatever. They're usually big, not always, but usually much bigger, square, they're fairly distinctive. So my ultimate goal, is to find, ID that buck's track, and, hopefully I'm scouting in the winter and jumping out of a bed. I'm looking at that bed. I'm looking at that track, and once I have that, that's a huge puzzle piece, because then I know, and this kind of shows the differences between each of us. I don't do that much glassing. I used to do a ton of glassing, and frankly, I don't do that much anymore, probably because I don't have that much. I just don't find myself having a whole lot of free time in the evening. But what I found is, in the farm country deer, that a lot of what I hunt, I'm able to walk the edges of, crop fields and look for tracks. And then that's kind of, it's kind of equivalent to glassing. I can see where the deer are coming in and going out, and do that in midday, do a quick loop. Don't get anywhere near bedding. I'll do that all summer long and in the fall, just trying to figure out where those tracks are probably made at night, but then I can get a direction of travel. And if I did my homework previous winter scouting, I can say, I need to hunt that bedding area a quarter mile back in, or, half a mile away. I think that's where he's bedding.
So how about this one? Jesse, you kind of alluded a little while back, or maybe it was Andy talking about Jesse, that you were killing several different bucks year after year in a row, like the first day of the season, or right towards the beginning of the season. So I want to talk about different times of the year, and we'll try to make this a little bit simple. If you could only pick 1 week of the whole year, if I said that you had to kill a mature buck, your life depended on it, and you had only 1 week of the season to do it in, what 1 week period would that be? And Joe, let's send it right back to you to start.
Well, assuming I'm on my home turf, areas that I've scouted already, it's the last week October for me. That's kind of my bread and butter. I'm pretty sure I've killed a mature buck in every week of the season. Like, we go from October 1st to then in November, and then of course we have late season too, and I've had success then. But basically October and November, I'm pretty sure I've had success every week of the season. That last week October, it's just, bucks are still pretty patternable. They're a little more visible. They are on these pre-rut patterns. They're kind of seeking out that first doe that smells right, and the first old does are just getting close. And that buck he isn't cruising around probably through the day, but you can catch him at first and last light on these kind of rut travel routes already. checking out the doe bedding areas, checking out the major food sources, and basically using his rut bedding, and that's what I'm targeting is his rut bedding. And it's usually, I don't want to say it's got a lot of sign, but because every buck's different, so, and a lot of older bucks don't leave hardly any sign, but it's if you look at enough bedding area locations and buck beds, you start to realize some are clearly located with the intent of keeping an eye on the does in the area. And those light up so consistently in late October. I mean, I just see it every single year, and I wait for, whatever conditions. All bedding is still, conditional, favors certain winds, certain temperatures. I wait for those conditions. I don't touch, I may not have set foot anywhere near, I probably didn't set foot anywhere near there since spring when I picked a setup nearby, and I'm going in there and hitting that. Ideally, I know there's that big buck in the area, either from those tracks, maybe from some, trail cam photos over the course of the year. And that's kind of my go-to time. So,
what can you elaborate? Can you elaborate on what you called the rut bedding? So, what would a rut bedding area look like for a buck as opposed to where you might find him the rest of the year?
Yeah. So, so this gets a little into individual bucks. Some bucks. Well, I'll start this way. The oldest bucks, in general, have the smallest core areas. There's outliers. There's some that roam around, and within that core area, he's got a certain number of locations that he prefers to bed, seek safety. That's his primary concern. But in that time period, right in the pre-rut, he is likely to use, he won't sacrifice safety hardly at all, but he will favor the locations that are closest to like a doe family group bedding. And for instance, in hill country, something I've noticed is I didn't coin this term, but it's called a thermal hub. So thermal hubs are where kind of thermals pool. So you can have kind of a low thermal hub where several drainages tie together, and the falling thermals in the evening come down from those. Say you have three small drainages tied together. Falling thermals come down from each of those and kind of pool in a central area. And a lot of time you'll see a ton of sign down there. Rubs and scrapes it gets torn up. Well, often you can't hunt down there, but that buck is dropping in there and scent checking the surrounding area to see, what's what with the does in the area in that late October time frame and a little bit into the rut. And he's often bedding on a secondary point right next to there, maybe a low bench. You can find those buck beds right in that close proximity. And it's in a location that he can, observe with his nose, which is their primary, it's equivalent to our eyesight. We believe what we see. A deer believes what he smells. He wants to be able to observe what is around. That it's hard to describe beyond if you see a big bed, maybe with an old rub right above it. It's in a very secure location that just makes you scratch your head and say, I don't know how to hunt this. That's probably an indicator that it's in a really secure location, and a big buck, if he's in that area, is probably going to use that bed. And if it's close to, say, 150 yards up the ridge or whatever is a mega doe bedding area, well, that bed is probably getting used in the late pre-rut. That's how I kind of look at it.
Awesome.
I think it was a great point that Joe said, and you don't hunt that spot. Or you can't, even though you know that deer is there, there's a reason why he's there. And people find that sign and hang a stand there and they screw it up. Don't hunt those spots, but know how to get close to those spots without screwing it.
How would you do that, Jesse?
You want to use that to your advantage. Like
That's right.
That's a great point.
It's so
just
smart
because you can't hunt a spot. Yep. Just because you can't hunt a spot, you can still use it to your advantage. So anyway, go on,
Right.
Jesse.
No, it was a great point that you said. You can't hunt those spots, and so many people don't have the discipline to not hunt that spot. You glass that spot, that spot is there, and when you see those does upwind of that spot, you can't find that buck, he's probably using the area that you scouted, and you try and hunt the periphery of that with the wind in your favor at all times. And when that wind switches, you get out of there. But you try and get lucky and cut him off, but you never hunt those spots. And for Joe to make that comment, that's the sign of a killer. He knows that you don't go in there, where a lot of people would never make that comment that it's an unhuntable spot. That's smart.
Yeah, it's a great point. All right, so Jesse, how about back to the original question? You get 1 week of the season. What is it?
Yeah, so Joe kind of had mentioned it as well. It depends on the state. If it's my home state, I like to do my homework way ahead of time, and I like to kill them fast. I like to kill them. We have a lot of pressure here. We have small block woods, and we have a lot of agriculture. So these guys can screw up the woods real quick, and everybody here hunts, so there's a ton of pressure. I like to get the job done. Everybody says, "Oh, there's an October lull." Well, that's good. I hope they stay out of the woods, because all I need is that last 15 minutes of light, or that first 40 minutes of light when they're going back into the bedding grounds. I really try and do my homework in my home state, and I try and get them killed. And New York, where I live, this is not a huge trophy state. It's not like I'm trying to kill a booner here. I'm trying to kill a good, respectable, 130, 140 class deer is like killing a 180 in Iowa. So it's not like I'm too worried that if I tag a 140 incher, I'm not going to be sad that there was a 180 here that I didn't get. I'm not worried about that. So I'm killing my home state buck. I'm not hunting a world class place, and I'm getting out of here as fast as I can and going to Ohio or Kansas or Illinois. And truthfully, if I was to hunt out of state, any out of state guy, if you don't have the knowledge of the ground the way Joe does in Iowa or Andy in Michigan, my advice would be get in your truck November 5th, November 6th, start driving, try and be in a stand or in a glassing point November 7th and hunt sun up to sundown for the next 7 to 10 days. You can sleep and relax and drink beer the rest of the year, but for those 7 to 10 days, punish yourself, and you will kill a giant. Maybe not a giant, but if you're hunting out of state and don't know where you're at, punish yourself for those 7 to 10 days. Keep your eyes open all the time, and those are your best odds for a non-resident. If I talk to some of my other buddies who are world-class guys, they will say the end of the rut, the end of November is when the true giants show up, because they've bred everything in their circle, and they're starting to cruise around looking for other unbred does. So for an average guy like me, I'm happy to kill a 150, 160, November 7th, November 14th to the 18th. That's when I want to be out of state for out-of-state hunting. In your home state, it all comes down to what you see. But for me, I like that first week. There's like 8 bucks together. They're all hitting food sources. If you see one buck, you're seeing every buck in the block, and you're going to be able to pick the one you want. So I like that for me.
That's great advice. That's great advice about, the differentiation between your backyard where you're dialed in and going in somewhere new, or even somewhere you've done a little bit of scouting. You're spot on there. Peak rut is where it's at if you want to go in somewhere new and, try to get the job done, especially, at a long distance from home.
Great. Thanks.
Andy, what are your thoughts on this? You got your 1 week. Which is it?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Jesse said. For me, specifically in Michigan, it's hard for me to pick something other than that first week of the season. I've been pretty successful I definitely don't kill one every year on the first week, but I've killed enough of them, and I've been on enough mature deer, and I've had opportunities at enough mature deer on that first week for that to really be my favorite time. And I know things can kind of come into play, like, you know, weather and all that, but just the you know, if I do my work, my due diligence in September, I should be on a good one that first few days of the season. If I'm not, I didn't work hard enough and I didn't prepare and I slacked. So I really love that time. In fact, I've started doing a lot of my traveling out of state just to hunt opening days. You know, I try to never miss an opening day in Ohio, and I've been successful opening day there. Same with Kentucky. Killed a couple down there in the first few days of the season. So I really like that time. The deer are unpressured. They're moving. You can still catch them on food sources. Not so much in Michigan, but as soon as I cross those lines, you know, food sources are fair game. Now in Michigan, I don't know that I've ever killed a deer on a food source here, a mature deer. I'd have to really look back through the hunts, but I'm almost always tight to bedding on the big mature deer. I got to get in the cover. The food sources are loaded with hunters, so you know, I usually have to get in tight. But I really like that October time frame. You know, even mid-October, like Jesse said, you know, if you know what you're doing, you know, you're still on deer at that time frame. You really have to, you know, fall back on your scouting and your knowledge of the area and what mature deer do at that time. But when I'm traveling out of state, I almost never hunt the rut here in Michigan. I might get a sit or two. But that's usually when I'll take like a trip to when I draw my Iowa tag, or, you know, I've been to Illinois and to Iowa. And, like Jesse said, that November, you know, for me, it's probably that November 5th, 6th time frame to the 12th. That's when I seem to see the biggest mature bucks on their feet and where I've had a lot of success, tons of midday kills. I really like that time frame. You know, to travel to a good, you know, a state that has, you know, a more target rich environment, I guess. And I've never hunted anywhere during that Thanksgiving time with a bow. You know, I've been to states where their gun season is open, but that's something that is kind of, you know, possibly in the works, especially next time I go on the Iowa tag, I might focus on that time because I'd really like to kind of extend my season and maybe, you know, focus a little more rut sits here in Michigan. But those would probably be my two favorite times, you know, times of the year. You know, if I had to choose a week or so, it would probably be somewhere in those two time frames.
Yeah, that would be wise, Andy, coming to Iowa. You know, both of you touched on that. The second half of the rut, you know, right as lockdown lets loose, they kind of depends where you're at in Iowa, but really from November 16th, 17th, 18th, that's when lockdown starts to kind of fall away. And for the next week to 10 days, that is your opportunity to see that world-class deer walking around doing something really dumb because he's just wore out and he's looking for, you know, one last doe, and that can be the downfall of him. So,
yeah, that's such a cool.
Yeah, hunting pressure is at an all-time low at that time period.
I think that was an invite. Did Joe just not invite us to Iowa?
Yeah,
he did. I think he said, Andy, that would be a great idea for you guys to come to Iowa at that time.
You know, that's Joe. It's such a cool opportunity. You know, there's very few states that have that time frame still open when it's archery season, and you know, I've never capitalized it. I kind of kick myself. You know, once gun season starts here, it's like, you know, I just don't get out. I don't really enjoy that as much. I'll get out a little bit here and there, but you know, it kind of lets the wind out of my sails. So I'm always looking for ways to kind of extend that archery season. And I think I could get in a couple other maybe a couple other states, or at least some more time in other states, and still be able to, hit Iowa at a good time if I push it back towards that later part of November.
Yeah, you have to be a little more dialed into what the deer are doing. So, like blasting or observations, that's more important than ever before, because a lot of times the weather's colder. The does are piled up on the prime food sources, whether that's acorns or cut corn or whatever. But you find those big doe concentrations. The bucks are circling in the background. They're still, they still got that urge. So, yeah, it's. I remember you last time you drew an Iowa tag. You had some action-packed hunts in late November, if I remember right. So.
Yeah.
Now,
definitely on the agenda.
So we just talked a little bit about late November. I was going to ask you, Joe, to elaborate on how you're hunting that time frame, but you just did. So now I want to go to the opposite. And both you, Andy, and Jesse mentioned that first week of the season. And you said, Andy, that if you did your due diligence in September, you'd have a good chance. Can you elaborate on how you actually go about doing that due diligence to allow for a successful early season hunt? And what do you do specifically those first couple days of the season in a spot that have made that so successful for you?
Well, I will definitely do a lot of glassing, that for to be specific, I don't waste a ton of time glassing like in August. I do it because I enjoy it then, but from what I've found is, there's can be a lot of things that change, between August and say mid-September or even late September. So I'll do it a little bit here and there in August. I'm definitely running some cameras and stuff and kind of monitoring that way. But, more so when the season gets closer, that 2-week period before the season, that's when I really start bearing down. I'm like, now the deer are in more of a pattern that's at least closer to the season. Now, a lot of times things change, like even, a couple days before the season, but I'm really trying to find a buck or two that is showing some sort of movement, and I might glass them on a food source, at last light. But, where I hunt, those food sources there's going to be guys there. There's going to be guys there on, opening evening, no doubt about it. So more so I rely, the areas that I hunt, I know intimately. I mean, I know them inside and out. I know where the doe's bed, when there's a good buck there, I know where the mature buck beds are. So when I see a deer show up, and it might be a visual, it might be a trail camera, it might be just a big track when I'm walking the perimeter of the food sources, I have a pretty good idea of where that deer is bedding on a given wind direction. So I kind of fall back on all my scouting that I did in the postseason, before green up. So I feel like I just know those areas so well. When a deer does show up, I have a pretty good idea how to get them. Now, there's always things that kind of come up and change, and you get caught flat-footed sometimes. But for the most part, if one shows up and he shows a weakness early in the season, I'm usually off the food source, tighter to bedding cover. That has been within 50 yards of the bedded deer. It's been within 100 yards. It just depends. But typically, from what I've seen, even in a high pressure state like Michigan, if you can get back into that security cover, into their core area, their bedding area, where they feel comfortable, where they've survived for years and years, they will move. Now might not move far, but they'll move, and they'll get up, and they'll, mill around a little bit, and they'll, inch their way away from that bedding area. And you got to be within that zone, in that safe zone where they feel safe. And,
that's right.
That's the whole balancing act of, shooting a buck out of his bed. You got to determine how close you can get without being busted. And that's the key. You got to get in without getting busted, but you want to be close enough where they're still going to move in daylight, in shooting hours towards your direction. And it's a difficult thing to kind of master, and I certainly haven't mastered it. I certainly screwed up a lot, but that's how I kill the majority of my bucks in October. I'm tight within the bedding, within 100 yards for sure.
Yep. Yep, Andy, that's even here in Iowa, I have not killed a public land buck on a food source in 2 days. So it just doesn't happen. Or,
Yeah.
Where you got to get it done is tight to bedding. That's for sure. That depends on pressure. It also depends a little bit on terrain, I think. Here, I know I don't have the pressure that you guys deal with. But still, I'm within 200 yards of bedding. It's hard in hill country. It's hard to get within 100 yards very often. It covers a lot of times a little more open, and we have high deer densities, so there's deer everywhere, and that's another challenge. Is just trying to not.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I don't have a lot.
Out.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of hill country here at all. But you mentioned something high deer density. I've hunted some very high deer density areas out of state. And, one thing I noticed there is that the deer, at least in that area, they would move quite far from bedding. There'd be groups of does and like these younger bucks that would start moving very early. So they got all these kind of sets of eyes that are heading towards the food sources early. And then these big bucks, it's kind of almost like they're sending out the dummies, early. And if, the whole herd is out there pounding away at the food source, those big ones get up. And we saw some really good deer and shot a couple really good deer in food sources, kind of in those lower pressure states, on a food source. And it's just the competition is so high. It stimulates earlier movement. But the trick is you got to stay undetected from all those, dozens and dozens of deer that come by first.
Jesse, would you add anything on the early season front or elaborate on this, how close you can be to beds or anything that Joe and Andy have talked about here?
Yeah, those guys nailed. They made great points, especially being that this platform you have with 3 different guys in 3 different areas, you're really getting 3 different techniques and 3 different styles, which is actually good. I think is really good for your listeners. I would the only thing I would touch base on what they said is like where I'm from, we have a lot of hedgerows, big agriculture, and small blockwoods. So I really like killing my home state deer. I mean, truthfully, I like killing them. If I can get them killed the first day, 2, maybe 3 days, that's my goal. And I will put, even if I got to take those 3 days off, that's when I try and get it done. They haven't been screwed up yet. Most guys, that's when guys are gonna start bombarding the woods. One thing I study along with all the deer sign is I study the hunter sign. A lot of these guys don't take down any of their stands. So I use these guys. They will literally pattern the deer for you because you can tell when these guys start hitting the woods because the deer's patterns will change. I try and kill these deer before they change. And if I can glass a shooter buck, I like to see. I don't care if I got to kill him in the morning or evening, and if I know where he's at, like obviously I have pre-hung stands and bedding grounds. However, I always have 7 or 8 sets of stands that are ready to go with foot pegs and with pull-up cords ready to rock. And a lot of times I will stage these stands just in the, on the edge of the woods on the ground. I know it sounds crazy, but that way, if I know where a buck is at and he's bedded, and I think you got to know the ground. If I think, all right, I can sneak in this woods, I think this deer's bedding 150 yards on the northeast corner, so he can wind everything. I'm going to try and slip in there and hang a stand 30 yards inside the woods. I'm going to glass him even before the season starts. I'm going to glass him. If I'm not seeing him, I'm going to have another stand and I'm going to go another 30, 40 yards. I know it sounds stupid, but I will literally have 4 or 5 stands and I'll just hang them and keep cheating in. And I won't take any of them down because if the wind isn't right or the wind is a little more out of the south, I can drop back and I'm not screwing anything up. And then usually for an evening hunt, those would be obviously for morning hunts in the woods. And I've killed numerous deer where I've gone in, glassed him on a morning hunt, and I thought, man, if I was just 60 yards closer, they'll go in bed, and a lot of times I'll back out. I know where he's bedded, and if I think the wind is right, I'll go for his throat and hang a stand right in where it's a horrible spot that every deer after they get past me is going to wind me. That's when you got to be really confident to do that, and you got to know, okay, I'm either going to kill him or blow him out. And I would say, which is kind of crazy, but 70% of the time, if I make that move, I kill him. And if I don't, usually I don't blow him out. He's spooked because every deer that's gone past me is snorting and blowing. He doesn't know what happened. I don't care what the other deer think. I'll back out, I'll slip out of there, and I won't do that again. I'll circle back in the next morning and start all over again. If that buck goes by me, he's getting shot. And by the time he wins me, he's dead. So, yeah, he doesn't know what's going on, but that's how I do it here. But I like that early season. And if you work hard at it and you play chess with it and really think, these deer aren't smart. I mean, I know I think I piss people off with that comment, but deer are not smart. They're an animal. They're a habitual animal. They have wonderful natural sense of smell. They have great eyes and they have great hearing. They're not smart. We are smart. So if you can just study their natural reactions, you're going to kill them. So don't psych yourself out when you're hunting these deer. It's an animal. You're going to kill them. You just have to be smarter than them, and we are smarter than them.
Yep, you are spot on, and that I really like how you said you got to go in with you're going to kill or blow them out, and that is a trait I've noticed. You have it. I noticed other hardcore killers have it, and that is a mentality you have to have. You have to set the groundwork, have that confidence, and then you go in with that mentality. Because otherwise, you hang back, and you miss an opportunity. And early season, particularly, you've got to be right on it. Both you and Andy mentioned that. The patterns change so fast. Those first few days of
that's right. Everything changes. The crops change. The people's pressure change. And Joe, the only reason I learned that, you got to learn by mistakes. The only reason I learned that, I used to kill big deer with just grit, just hunting. Before I had kids, I hunted nonstop. And I found that, truthfully, I wasn't really efficient. I killed big deer just by being a tough, nonstop, relatively smart hunter. But once I had kids and my own business, I took more chances. I thought, you know what? I don't have time. I can't hunt for the next 4 days because I've got the kids. I got to get them off the school bus. I'm going for this buck tonight. I think everything's right. Screw it. I don't care if I screw it up. And all of a sudden, it was like drilled them. And I take more chances now and do the craziest stuff. I've killed some deer in the dumbest tree stands. I'm not a very big guy. I only weigh 150, 60 pounds. I have killed deer out of stands that I've carried in there, climbed up the tree, hung it, and literally sat in it that night in a sumac tree that's the size of my thigh and shot the best buck around. But you got to take calculated risks.
Yep. You're exactly, that's right. That's exactly my story too. Once I started having kids, I grew up hunting 60, 70, 80, bow hunts in a year. That's long a thing of the past, and I'm not going to be getting back to that anytime soon, if ever. And now, I want my target buck in under 10 hunts, and that's, you've got to do so much groundwork before that. And when the time is right, you have to just go all in. I
That's right.
sat in the edge of a milo field and killed a 175-inch 10-pointer on the ground, something ridiculous. He was going to bust me four times out of 5, or 2 times out of 3, but he didn't, and I got an arrow at him, So that you gotta, and to get to that point, it's a journey. You can't skip to that point, Like I think all 3 of us, we needed a huge amount of time out there just to kind of build that basic woodsmanship, basic understanding of how deer, operate and the phases of their, the season as deer see it and what hunting pressure means and, the good access routes and, how to play the wind and just all the fundamentals. It's so important. You gotta, for the younger and newer hunters out there, just enjoy that ride. And then you'll get to a point where you can start making some of those decisions. You know, I don't mean that in any kind of arrogant sense. It just takes time. You know, it takes a ton of time to master. So
yeah, you can't buy that time. You know, I think I may have touched on that in my DIY Q&A, but you know, I think like you'd be hard pressed to find a guy that's been hunting a long time that's been super successful that, you know, like I said, at some point in his life, he devoted everything to hunting. I mean, it literally, you know, every day of the year he was doing something, scouting, hunting every day of the season, and making a ton of mistakes. And you got to kind of go through those. It's like trial by fire. You kind of got to go through that to develop your own style, to develop your own skill. And then as it develops, you can back off, you can hunt much less, but the preparation is where it's all done. You know, all the scouting, all the archery, you know, fine tuning your setups, learning your areas and you know, intimately and learning the, you know, specific deer from year to year and their tendencies. Then you're able to make these much more informed decisions. I call them almost instinctual because you've done it so many times, you've made these mistakes and you eliminated them. So you make far less mistakes and things almost come like I describe myself as like a feel hunter. I get like these feelings and all it is just recall of experiences that I've had over and over again and mistakes and successes that, you know, you get these feelings like this is the spot, you know, or I need to push in a little bit further. I think I can push in a little bit further. And you get these feelings, and what you find is over time, these feelings are right more and more often because you've tried it. You're not sitting back, you know, being, you know, lazy or, you know, you're being aggressive and you're making those moves and you're learning. You're learning what you can get away with. You're learning what you can't. And you're developing your own style, and it's just you have to go through that. Yeah, and I feel bad for some of these guys that, you know, kind of join the beast. And they're already married and they're, you know, maybe in their mid 30s and they already got kids and stuff. And they have the heart, you know, they want to do it. And it's, you know, really it's like, you know, it's those young guys that, you know, they're in high school and, you know, just out of high school and they're just pounding away at this and they're developing, you know, their craft and honing their skills. And though you need that time. And when you're married with kids, it's like, you know, it's really hard to do it at that time because, you know, you're taken away from something that's much more important, you know, than being a good deer hunter. So
those guys can also, everybody has a different success platform. And going out, finding even if all you're finding if in your state a 120 is a good deer and you can, or a decent deer, if you can find a 120 and you don't have a lot of time and you can figure that deer out, and you can put a clean shot on that deer, you should be proud of that deer. If you know, especially if you're raising a couple kids, that's my trophy standards have gotten lower, because of that. You know, because of the lack of the time. However, when I kill something now, it is so much sweeter than the big ones I killed 15 years ago because you know, I killed them with blood, sweat, and tears before, and now I'm killing them with quick, clean knowledge. And even though those guys, you know, you don't want to tell those guys, if you're 35 and you're just now taking it serious, you're really never going to be an elite guy. That's not true. I mean, everybody's eliteness is different. You know, I will never be at Joe's caliber. Like I'm not. I'm hunting a different. You know, it's just a different world.
You're hunting a different state, man. You're hunting a different state.
Exactly.
That's the difference between you and me. I freely admit that.
But I'm very proud of, it sounds stupid, I've got some, you know, some big deer, and I'm very proud of them that are from other states, Kansas and Arizona and Montana. And I'll tell you, there's a couple 110 inchers, 120 inchers that are on my floor that are skull mounts that are the biggest trophies. And they came from working hard in hard to kill states. So everybody's trophy is different. And if you did a good job and you're enjoying it, it really isn't it sounds stupid, but it is about killing big stuff. But those guys can't feel bad if you're just taking it serious at 35 and you got 3 kids. man, go out and live for the moment. Even if you only get 5 sits, breathe that air, that fall air, and take the whole thing in, and do the best you can. You can't compare yourself to, everybody else. You've got to try and beat yourself every year and be happy with that.
Yep.
That's right.
Amen, brother.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Because we all get, and I've been bad at this big buck thing kills all of us. I mean, it will eat you up and you will become consumed in it. Sometimes you don't even enjoy it. I've got buddies all over the country that are legit. They're like, they're world-class guys. And they'll get they're passing up 180s because they know there's a 211, and it's like, dude, you're killing yourself. And that's why they're world-class guys. But don't get down on yourself for killing 150 incher. Enjoy it. That's a great buck, and be happy.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Oh man, I am loving this conversation, but we are going to hit pause for one quick second here to take our final break of the day and thank our partners at Mathews Archery. And as we've been discussing over a handful of our past episodes, Mathews launched their new bow this past fall, the Mathews Triax. And today we're going to hear just a bit more about the new rig from world-class archer Levi Morgan.
The Triax was, I think, originally built for the whitetail hunter. Tree stand blind, so compact and quiet. But, on my adventure hunts, what I found is I love it for everything. I love it for mountain hunts, whitetail hunts, tree stand blind. It doesn't matter because I love the idea of a compact bow. But I only love that idea if I'm not sacrificing accuracy. And with the Triax, I definitely found out real quick that I wasn't. It's as good a shooting bow as I've ever shot in my life. It's fast and quiet and so small, dead in the hand, literally. It's a killing machine in pretty much every scenario we put it through, and we put it through the test last year.
A lot of other people I've talked to have just mentioned how quiet it is, how this new stabilizing system in the silencers are making a big impact. Is that something you've noticed too, and is that substantially different than other bows you've shot?
Yeah, I think I've learned that for sure throughout the year. I honestly knew it was quiet whenever I shot it, but what we really was kind of the telltale sign was we started, I was hitting animals lower and lower and in the heart because I always aim low because of whitetails ducking on me in the past. And so I've just kind of programmed myself to aim low, and I just kept hitting them right where I was aiming, in the heart, and which is a good thing, but I felt like I was flirting with being a little too low. So we started going back through the footage this year, and it was amazing at how these animals were just standing there at 40, 50 yards taking these shots with the Triax and not budging at all. So I think that was a true testament to how quiet these bows really are.
If you'd like to learn more about the Mathews Triax, you can visit MathewsInc.com. And now back to the show. So when you're making this switch, because we've talked a lot about all three of you, and I just want to say the last 20 minutes you guys have been talking back and forth has been some of my most enjoyable time on the podcast. I should just let you guys just sit here and talk, and I should just sit out of it and not say anything.
Well, we're going to Iowa in November. You can come and video us.
There you go.
We're going to do this at Joe's house.
I like that idea.
You guys draw a tag, let me know.
Yeah, the same here, man. You can come to New York anytime. Great trade, right?
Uh-huh. So you guys are talking a lot about these lessons that you've learned the hard way, though, and how it took those challenges for you to now be where you're at this point. Can each of you, and let's start with you, Andy, can each of you point to a specific challenge that you had as you've been through this journey to become a better hunter for these big mature bucks? So a specific challenge that really changed the game for you. You had this aha moment because of this realization or this issue. Andy, can you start on something like that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a few. One that stands out is mature deer are different, right? They're not like every other deer in the woods, and that's where most guys, probably your most average guys, that's probably where they misstep right off the bat. They want to see deer. If they see
5 or 6 bucks, they're coming back in and they're bragging about it, or they're excited. Oh, I saw a 3-point and a 6-point and a 100-inch 8-point, a bunch of does, and that's all fine and dandy. But really, a mature deer is a different animal, and they behave different. They have different tendencies, and that's you gotta make that switch, to hunting a mature deer and really kind of learning the tendencies of a mature deer, at least in the area you're hunting. And that's obviously, different for different areas. But, for me, Michigan, I'm going to kind of focus on that. It's, I've always had to kind of get close in they're close to their bedding area and, really kind of fine tune that strategy. Just getting in tight where they feel comfortable moving in daylight. And the next thing I would probably say, like timing, I've wrote a couple articles about, my first sit, in any location is my best chance at a mature buck. And that's, I've shown that time and time again through my own hunts. I think 80% of my kills are on the very first sit in that spot. So, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to save those spots, my high percentage spots, for when the conditions are right, when they're perfect. And that might be the time of year. It might be, the time of year where that area tends to draw in a mature deer. It might be a mature deer, his tendency in that area, like he shows up, early season, or maybe, it's an area where every year he shows up during the rut. So I'm going to focus my sits during that time. So just keeping the pressure low off those spots and moving in when the conditions are right. And then, for me, I've talked about it a couple times, but you got to be able to pull that shot off on a deer, and you got to. I'm sure we all know. We probably have a buddy. We probably have a few of them that would have an amazing wall of bucks if they were able to capitalize on the shot.
Yeah.
I know I do. And I know they're going to listen to this, and I'm not poking fun at all. I've tried to help most of them through that, because I went through it. There was a time, yeah. And, for me, I'm kind of an archery nut, so I'm as into archery as I am into hunting. So I somewhere in the middle of my career, I developed severe target panic, crazy, like to the point where I couldn't even put my pin on something without punching off that trigger. And I remember calling Jesse one year, and I was like, man, I don't know if you remember this, Jesse, but I called you. I was like, gosh, I think I screwed up on like 3 big bucks in like a 2-week period. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so frustrated. And, you had like an amazing year. You killed that giant in Kansas, and you're like, man, I don't know what to say. I feel bad because I had such a good year. I was just looking for, I was trying to get some advice on like, maybe someone that had been through that, but it didn't sound like you had. But
I've never had it. I've always heard of it.
Yeah.
I don't believe in that stuff. I don't listen to other people. I don't let people get in my head. I don't even want to listen to this. I've been putting my finger in my ear the whole time. No,
that's good. Yeah.
Start talking about something else.
Yeah, that's right. La 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 la.
Yeah, that's good.
You gotta be
keep it that way. Don't even think about it. But for me, that was a huge challenge. But I worked through it. I talked to a lot of guys, a lot of good archers, and I developed my own way of shooting, and it kind of beat that target panic. And for me, it's a much more relaxed way of shooting. There's no anticipation. There's no urge to rush the shot. I'm in complete control. So ever since then, I can honestly say like my shots have all been, on the money. And it's a wild animal, so they move sometimes. Things aren't always perfect, and there's branches and twigs and whatnot. But as far as my shot execution, it's where I want it to be. And that for me personally was a big challenge. But I would say those 3 things, kind of some challenging and some, I guess stepping stones that kind of helps me be more successful.
That's great. What about you, Jesse?
Hit me with a question again. We got so off on that.
Yeah. So I'm just curious about what, if there was a specific challenge or aha moment that happened over the course of your, growth as a deer hunter that has made a big difference for you that you can point to.
Yeah, I would say I think everybody does have an aha moment. And I would say I definitely did when I was probably, I grew up just a pretty humble farm kid. And really, my dad was a good hunter, but he was a meat hunter. Like, I don't think my dad has ever killed a buck. He's literally, he was always just go out. He's a woodsman, kill rabbits, kill woodchucks, coon, fox, everything. You sell the pelt, you live off the land type of guy. He is not a trophy hunter. So I just grew up, and it really turned out good for me. I grew up truthfully, just a murderer, just knowing how to move, when not to move, and kill stuff. My parents divorced when I was really young, so I didn't see my dad a lot. And really one of my jobs at my mom's was, just kill stuff, just get stuff killed. So, when I was probably 20, I would say I had killed, luckily a couple decent bucks, but nothing big. And they weren't calculated kills. They were a kid walking out to a tree, sitting in it because his dad sat there 30 years ago. And one day I was sitting in a tree, and I had seen a good deer in this area, and I thought, why is this deer not here? I'm doing everything that my dad taught me. I'm doing everything that everybody tells me to do, and I'm just having average success. And then I realized, I'm literally sitting here listening to everybody else's advice. And it was actually good for me. I kind of had a falling out with my dad. So I kind of took everything he had ever said to me in my life, and I questioned it. And I thought, you know what, I got to start evaluating everything and take my own knowledge and my own notes. And I literally remember the moment I grabbed my bow, hooked onto it, I lowered it, and I walked out of that woods, and I realized right away I had been walking into this woods the way my dad taught me to. We would park the truck on this laneway, walk all the way down this hedgerow with the wind at our back, and then walk into the woods and sit in a tree. This is stupid. And I realized right then, he's not really that great of a hunter. He's a gun hunter. And right then I started studying how things work. And I literally can't even tell you the confidence that just shot through me right away, because I knew I already I'm gonna be better than my dad. This is stupid. How could you even contemplate going in the way that we've always been doing it? I started studying other guys, and I realized they're screwing everything up. And that was that was the first year I killed a 100, which for New York is big. I think he netted 132. And I have killed a Pope and Young buck every year since. I think there might be 1 year that I shot one with a muzzleloader instead of the bow, but that was, and that's, in my opinion, that's something everyone should do. I think you should take what Joe says, analyze it, and really think about it, but don't be afraid to question it and put it to the test as far as where you live in your style. Take what Andy says. Don't put anything any of us say in gold. And anything these guys write, it's great that they're writing articles and stuff, and I've learned a lot from a lot of their articles, but a lot of it is nonsense. So don't take it to heart. Find your own style and find your own way and master it. Be a master of your style. And I think that has helped me a lot. I literally just forgot about everything anybody had ever said to me about hunting, and I started my own studying of how things work. I kept my own notes, and I worked off my own results. And really, it has changed, and I've varied it, but it works. And that was my big turning moment. And I would recommend everybody take advice, but evaluate it and test it, and then take your own notes. And don't be afraid to be different. Don't be afraid to have a different style. If you notice everything Andy says and everything Joe says and everything I say, it's really slightly different, and we're all very successful guys. Everybody has a style, and it works.
Such great points.
Yeah, that's really well said. I completely agree. You got to make your own way. So.
Yep.
So Joe, what would be your take on this question?
Yeah. So, they both had a lot of things I could relate to. First off, Jesse, your background's pretty similar to mine as far as, I grew up hunting to eat. We didn't have much money, and we needed to put food on the table, and that was my job. And I started I killed hundreds of rabbits and squirrels every single fall. You know, that was my start. And then, yeah, I killed deer for the meat. You know, you need a deer, you need food, you kill it. You know, so it was very methodical. It's fun, but it was you know, that's where I developed you know, some sense of woodsmanship and you know, how to move, when to move, when not to move, you know, how to make the shot, that kind of thing. It was in my teens. I can definitely relate to that. And then what Andy said, you know, definitely an aha moment, hunting mature bucks for what they are, not just deer. You know, that was kind of the first big, when I was deer hunting, you know, I was deer hunting, and then, yeah, it was, you know, it wasn't that long ago, 15 years ago probably, I realized, you know, what I was doing is silly. Was sitting in a tree stand, you know, dreaming about a big buck and looking at, you know, a bunch of does that walk by. So, anyway, yeah. So, oh, sorry, my kid just interrupted me. Anyway, yeah.
I've been waving at mine, telling him, go back. I'm on the phone.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. So, you know, so I can relate to that. Second, you know, first time sits, that's kind of, you know, that was another step in the right direction and a huge improvement in my efficiency when I realized, hey, you know, I'm sitting some spots 4, 5, 6 times and I'm killing a big buck on the first sit in a location. You know, those spots that are great spots. Oh, I'm going to try it again. No, you're not going to kill that. A resident big buck, they are on to you. So, that's true. And then making the shot, you know, call it target panic or whatever. I did definitely struggle with making the shot early on in my bow hunting career. You know, I had a pretty lousy track record, but I wasn't satisfied with it. I changed my practice routine to better reflect basically real hunting situations. So I wasn't just sitting there, you know, standing there shooting arrows in my t-shirts and flip-flops, you know, and that was it. Trying to mimic hunting situations. I did a lot more visualization, and that was huge for me. You know, when I'm sitting in a tree, I'm in the woods, I'm thinking about how a buck could come by, both easy shots and hard shots. What do I have to do to get the shot made?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I've just seen a huge improvement in how, you know, basically my percentage of encounters that result in kills, and also, you know, missing or wounding animals. That I have a, you know, I've been able to maintain the last 12 years or so a really good track record of getting the job done, and I put it all towards, you know, preparing for the shot, practicing, you know, visualizing how an animal could come in, and, you know, okay, what if he comes in back there and I got to twist around, and what if I have a split second shot, what do I do? And, you know, preparing
That's
for
an
that.
Excellent tip.
Yeah. And it has made the difference on several bucks that I know if I had thought about that, a situation very similar to that beforehand, I wouldn't have killed that buck. But it was, you know, maybe a split second shot opportunity where he just paused, but I was kind of expecting it, or they come in a direction that I wasn't expecting, but I thought, hey, what if a buck comes in back there? What do I have to do to get that shot? How do I have to twist around, you know? And it's made it happen. So that's I guess pretty much it. There's been there's probably many more, but
that's good stuff. So I want to ask you guys 2 more questions. I'd like to keep you here for much longer, but I wasted a half hour of your time before we even got this podcast going because of technology. So I need to kind of move things along, and maybe we're just gonna have to do it 5 more of these over the course of the next couple months, because this is so good.
I don't know about you guys, but I could talk to these guys all night. It is so refreshing to talk to guys that are literally, I want to finish their sentences, and I know they can finish mine. It's really it's an honor. It's exciting to talk to guys who literally get it.
Yeah,
they literally get it. Yep. So I'm fine to stay all night.
Maybe we'll have our first 4-hour podcast.
I'd be good for a little while, but I don't know how my wife would feel if I was here at 2 a.m. Yakking on the phone yet.
I think we've made it clear then Joe's a quitter.
Yep.
So let's shift the topic a little bit, and it's something that you guys have alluded to all throughout our conversation. It's always kind of been something you mentioned here or there, or something that you're thinking about. But I think this is a topic that many deer hunters can point to as another one of their aha moments, that being when they started really thinking about wind in one way or another, that also took them to a different level from a deer hunting standpoint. I remember, kind of like you guys all talked about, I grew up just hunting like my dad did. I just walked into the woods, sat next to a tree, never even thought about the implications of what the wind was doing that day. And just changing that one thing just was a light switch moment without a doubt. So let's start with you, Andy, I guess. Can you talk about how wind factors into what you do, whether that be how you try to avoid getting winded, or how wind maybe impacts where you think deer will be bedded or where they'll move, or anything like that? Can you talk to me about wind and your deer hunting strategy?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the time of the year, I suppose. But I mean, that's probably the first thing I look at on any given day is, obviously the wind direction. I'm not one that tries to beat a deer's nose. I wash my clothes, but that's about it as far as that goes. But, early season and, through October, when I'm kind of focused more on, bedding areas, I'm thinking about wind and how they relate to which bedding areas would be used in a typical area that I'm focusing on at that time. So, for instance, if there's a buck, in this certain area that has my interests, and I know that he beds, on this oxbow, with a south wind, then that's when I'm gonna hunt that deer in October, on that wind, and try to kill him coming out of that bed. That'd be one example of how I would use, wind, on like a bed-based type hunt. Maybe switching more towards, the rut, or maybe late October, when, scrapes and that types of stuff, that type of sign kind of starts picking up. I haven't really killed a whole lot of deer, like sitting over scrapes. It's not really a tactic of mine, but there are certain ones that I do find, and on rare occasion that I've heard people call them primary scrapes, but that might be something I might focus on in that late October time frame, maybe after a fresh rain, it rains at night and then, it kind of cuts off in the middle of the night. That might be a spot that I might try, that next day, if it's a good area or, a buck that maybe I want to go after in that area, and I would sit downwind of that scrape, so I'm using the wind, trying to sit downwind of it, not necessarily shoot him on the scrape, but maybe checking it downwind. And then during the rut, I'm using the wind to more of how a buck would use the terrain and the wind to his advantage. So, I might, it's very common for me to sit on downwind sides of doe bedding areas. I like those spots. I like them better than your typical funnel, for big mature deer. It's a spot where deer are going to be coming constantly, when they're searching for does and estrus. So, I put myself in a target-rich environment in the rut. I'm usually leaving Michigan, so there's going to be more than one buck in the area probably that I would shoot. So I'm going to sit in that downwind side of that doe bedding area. And, if I'm in the right spot, I'm going to have some good action typically. I don't know, but those are just a few examples of how I use the wind. In hill country, I don't have a ton of experience there, but I'm always monitoring the wind, and depending on the time of the year, more times than not, they're using the wind to their advantage. So you really got to be careful. Sometimes when you've heard this said a million times, but sometimes when you put the wind perfect for you, it's dead wrong for the deer. They might not be there in a certain bedding area if it's dead wrong, obviously, or they might not use a certain terrain feature or funnel the way you're wanting them to, because the wind simply isn't in their advantage. So there's a lot of times you got to cut corners, and you got to take some risks. And you hear about just off wind, hunting at just off wind. I do that a lot. You got to let the deer think that they have the advantage and that they're safe. Especially a mature deer, they're just not going to move a ton and show that type of vulnerability where they don't have some sort of wind advantage where they can detect their surroundings, or or at least when they're going after does, they got a mission. They're on a mission to find out what's in that area, and they're going to use their window advantage. So you got to cut those corners and be close to that.
Do you think, Andy? Yep. Do you think, Andy, that a buck, can you say that a buck will always, if he's heading somewhere, he's always going to have the wind in his face or crossing his face or something like that? Or, because I know some guys who will say, I'm never going to hunt somewhere unless a buck could have the wind, in his advantage coming towards me. Do you think that's true, or can there be exceptions to that?
Well, no, I don't think that's true. I've seen deer, hunting or moving all sorts of wind, but typically if they're in an area where they feel safe, typically close to their bedding area, they'll move, with their wind at their back, wind at their side. They'll kind of head in the direction that they kind of want to go. But I do feel, and it probably depends on the hunting pressure and maybe terrain to some extent, but I do feel like if the wind is there in their advantage, if they can smell up ahead, they will move further and they will move earlier. So, for instance, a few years ago, I was hunting this buck on a property kind of near where I live, and this buck stepped out of this bed, and he stood there, and he just waited, and he let. There was a kind of one of those calm, like light and variable wind days, and he sat there for 20 minutes and never moved. And that wind switched just about every direction. And he got a very good idea of kind of what was in the area. And, when he thought the coast was clear, he started moving. He felt confident that he diagnosed the area, and he started moving, and he moved quite a ways, where if the wind was dead wrong, I don't think he would have ventured off from his security cover as far. So, they don't always move with their wind in their face. They obviously can't, but I do think when they have that advantage, especially going on like a bed to feed type travel route, I think they will move further. If they have the wind to advantage, if they can smell up ahead and kind of scent check those areas, they trust their nose, so
that makes
that's
a lot
pretty
of sense.
pretty much how I go about it.
Yeah, that's a great point that I would just reiterate. You say, the big thing is think about what the wind is to the deer advantage, and then figure out a way to make it work for you, the hunter.
That's right.
If you can't, then you don't hunt that spot. If you can't figure out a way to get in there, then that's the wrong spot. You got to figure out another spot, to make it work. But think of it in terms of the deer first, not you, the hunter. Otherwise, you always be, too far away.
Right. Yeah.
Joe, would you add anything more from how you think about wind or any other facets of that?
That's the big thing. Another kind of important point I would make is it's very regional. Depends. Deer adapt to their environment. So that's not just human hunting pressure, but I've become very aware of this hunting a little in northern Wisconsin. The primary hunters up there are wolves and bears. So I see far more wind to back movement. They're concerned about those predators trailing them down from their scent. So, and the human hunting pressure is a little lower. So, look at what the deer are doing, where you are. That's my advice. And there's going to be patterns, and base your hunting based on that. Now here, in Iowa, deer are definitely using wind to their advantage. How I would describe it is kind of, they'll move in every which way of wind depending on conditions, but around destinations. So that's not just that's food, but also bedding. They are going to try to use the wind to their advantage. So entering a food source, they'll a lot of times enter in a low area. I see a big buck will, where thermals might be pooling, and bedding. The vast majority of the time, they are J-hooking into bedding from the downwind side. So they may be traveling in a crosswind, but they'll hook downwind and they'll come up and then they'll bed. That's what I see in hill country. So, but it's regional. Look what the deer are doing. I'm certain there'd be patterns. No matter, wherever the listeners are, there's patterns what they're doing, and based your hunting based on how they're moving according to the wind. But they are using it. I guarantee the deer are using it. So.
Yeah. All right, Jesse, you want to wrap this one up on the wind? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think the wind is kind of like the glass is half empty, half full. It depends on how you look at it. I'm a big fan of the wind. Some people are so the wind kills you. Yeah, it does. The wind makes you or breaks you. So you've got to be smart about it. I love the wind, and in today's day and age, if probably everybody has a weather channel on their phone. If you're not checking that weather channel before you, I'm checking it, 6 hours before, looking at it and go, okay, the wind's going to change at 5 o'clock. I got to account for that because I don't want to be sitting in my stand and have it hit my back. So really study the winds, and at least where I'm at, it's pretty much always a southwest wind. Those deer cannot possibly always move towards the southwest. They move with it. They're always using it, but you can cheat it, and you got to cheat them as close as you can with the bow and arrow. With a gun, it doesn't. Sounds bad. With a gun, it's a completely different world. Just get way, way, way away, and you're going to kill them. With a bow, you got to cheat that wind and figure out what that wind's going to be, and really play it. But I think a lot of it comes down to pressure too. I think if these deer are heavily pressured, they are going to come to every food source with the wind in their favor. They're going to circle their bed every time. If it's early in the season and they haven't been pressured, they're a little more laid back. They're not spooky. You can get away with more, and that's why you got to have that knowledge. Okay, this is a good night to hunt this stand, or I've killed so many of my best New York bucks. I really look for that oddball north wind or an east wind, because I can access so many spots that are honey holes that I can never hunt with a southwest wind. And a lot of times those deer will bed with a southwest wind, the thermals will change, and the rest of the day we're getting an east wind. Well, those bucks still want to go to where they were last night. And that's when, as long as they haven't been pressured, they're going to travel a little bit with the wind at their back, and I'm going to kill them. And, man, I have killed so many good ones. On a north wind, I'm literally standing in my shop just jumping up and down. I can't wait to get out of work and go, and because I know I'm going to kill them. I know I'm going to have an encounter. And those odd winds, and so many other guys, they just go sit the same stand they always sit, and then they have a horrible night. Well, dude, you're hunting a stand that's set up for a southwest wind, and it's an east wind. What did you expect? So if I'm hunting a pocket, I've got one spot that's literally like 4 acres. I think I have 12 stands in there. It just depends on the wind and what you can slip into it. The wind can be it is a blessing. You've just got to use it smart. It's kind of like, wrestling against a really strong kid. Use his strength against him. Let him exhaust himself. And it's the same with hunting the wind, man. Just use it as a weapon. Use the deer's nose. They think if they can smell nothing, the coast is clear. They're going to just walk through. And if you can escape that scent, they're screwed. You're going to smoke them. So I love the wind. It's a great tool. And really hunt off winds. I love odd winds. So that would be my take on winds.
It's a great perspective.
Yeah, the vast majority of my bucks I've killed, they were probably within 10 feet of smelling me. They were just
that's right
there when I got that shot. And then another point on that, a lot of them I've killed 50 to 100 yards downwind to somebody else's spot.
Yes, they're checking them.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah, that's such good points right there.
So, how about we wrap it up with this? Well, number one, I'm going to try to convince all of you to come on and do this again someday. So whatever I need to do to weasel you guys into doing that, let me know. Yeah. But number two, I'd like to hear from each one of you a story of a successful hunt and kill that you think is a perfect illustration of what makes you uniquely a good or successful hunter. So if you can think back to a hunt where you killed a buck that illustrates what makes you a good hunter, that's what I'd like to hear right now from each of you. And how about Jesse? Let's throw it right back to you. Can you think of a story you can share?
Oh man, you hit me first. I was sitting here thinking this is like ordering food. I was thinking somebody else has to go first so I can think. Man, I have been so fortunate to kill so many good. I have some great stories on killing does, or killing rabbits and woodchucks. I guess a story that would say I was a good hunter. I would say, jeepers, persistence. I'd say I killed one a few years ago in Kansas, and where I was hunting, there is no trees. There's really no tree stand hunting. I really enjoy it. It's spot and stalk. It is. It's like nothing I grew up doing, so it's very challenging. And I glassed up a couple different deer. I got screwed by a couple other hunters on public land. I was kind of getting frustrated, and I found a bomber of a buck, or to me it was a bomber of a buck. And I saw this deer running across this prairie. I ran out after him. He literally was chasing a doe and chasing off another buck, almost ran me over. I was so frustrated. I couldn't have shot him with a gun. I mean, he was literally within 20 yards of me, just flying with like grass that was up to my ankles between us. It was awesome. So that buck was so impressive to be next to. I was just like, I don't care what it takes. I am killing this deer. And, I went out for the next 2 days and looked for this deer and glassed, could not find him. I'm sure he was breeding a doe somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and I ended up glassing him up the next day. It took me 5 or 6 days. It was a new piece of ground in an unfamiliar state, and I ended up putting a stalk on him. I think he had 4 or 5 bucks with him and 12 does. So it was just a ton of eyes. There's yucca plants. I mean, it's so awesome. It was great. It's probably my favorite hunt of my life. And, but I mean, I kept getting busted, but I was smart enough to not get busted by him. I got busted by the satellite bucks that took off running, and kind of the herd would get up and they'd move, 300 yards. I'd have to restock him. A couple spots he was unstalkable. And then it was kind of like what Joe and I were saying earlier. The sun was setting. I had already been hunting there for 7 or 8 days, and it was like, I'm going for broke. I took off my boots, and I ran probably a quarter, half mile, big circle in this prairie, and there was a little bit of terrain there, some rocky bluffs, and I took off my boots for the last 200 yards, and man, I had these little thistles that they have out there just embedded in my feet. I was bleeding. I couldn't get them out of my feet, and I just kept going. They were stuck in my thighs. I mean, they're in my knees and stuff. And I came around this rocky bluff, and I could just see him, and I ranged a rock that was close to him. It was 38 yards, and he was bedded, and he was bedded away from me. And I knew it was going to be – I'm getting excited thinking about it. This is awesome. I knew it was going to be – once I trusted that, I had to draw, step out, and make a quick shot because they were all right there. And I remember my heart was racing, and it was like, this is make it or break it. This is like your whole trip. And it's just all those years of shooting red squirrels and catching snakes and shooting frogs and sneaking up on woodchucks. That's when before I knew it, I stepped out, drew my bow, and drilled them. And all those instincts of listening after the shot and watching where he went and being patient, it all paid off. And everything, it was like textbook. If you could have had that on video, it would have been phenomenal. And that was right then I thought to myself, like, I didn't even mean to do all this. Like, I didn't consciously do any of that. That was just like what Joe had said. It was just instinct of being a killer took over, and I was pretty proud of myself. That was a big public land whitetail, and I was pretty tickled with that. So I am so long-winded. Sorry that took forever.
No, that's an awesome story. Andy, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, sure. Man, I kind of want to tell the story of my buck from last year, but the story was just posted on the website today, so I'll skip that one. But the next one that comes to mind is probably, ironically, my biggest buck, and doesn't really have anything to do with the size, but it was on my birthday, November 5th, and I went to a spot. It's a small spot that typically is good during that time frame, and it's good because it's like a river bottom area, lots of does, and during that time of year, early November, it typically draws in some bucks, and under normal circumstances, there's a couple of good ones in the area. But anyway, it was a highly anticipated hunt, one of my favorite spots, and I drove there, which is from my house probably about 25 miles, and then climbed up in the tree, and the wind is just dead wrong, completely different than what they said it was going to be. And I was like, holy cow. I'd been kind of waiting, to hunt that spot, and it's kind of like a pinch. It's a bedding area. It's a doe bedding area that pinches down. So it's a kind of a funnel in a bedding area, just a phenomenal spot. And, I may have been able to kind of sit it out and had some luck, but I was like, I just can't. I've been waiting all season to hunt this spot. I can't burn it out on a wind that's not perfect. So I climbed down, and I actually drove 33 miles back to a different property. And the reason I chose that property is because there was a stand that, a spot. There wasn't a stand hung, but a spot that I had prepped that, again, the year prior, I had a very big buck, had an encounter with one. I think it was on November 4th, though, the year prior, and this was November 5th. So I drove to that spot, had my lone wolf on my back, and started heading towards that spot. On the way to that spot, I obviously kind of peeking around and, just trying to kind of scout my way in, sneak in. This is midday. And I noticed some very large sets of tracks, big, some of the biggest I've ever seen. And I kind of, looked a little closer and with the binoculars up, and I saw some rubs that were the size of my thigh. I mean, the biggest rubs I've seen in Michigan. And I'm looking, from a distance of probably 20 yards or so, and I'm got the glass on the rubs. I'm like, holy smokes, and I'm looking, and there's shavings on the leaves. Like, they're on top. This just happened probably today. And then I look on it's kind of a corner of a standing cornfield that was, it's probably a good 70 acres. And in the middle of that standing cornfield is a big oak tree. So a little kind of like a little oak island where creates a little mound, I guess, where the corn isn't planted. And then it comes to a corner where there's a hardwood and then a set-aside field, like a CRP overgrown field. And on that edge of the hardwoods, there's a line of scrapes, and each one had a little bit of urine in it. It was wet, So I'm like, holy, this deer is here. I don't know where he's at, but he's here. So I didn't even make it to the stand that I was going to. I set up downwind of that area. Had no idea where he was, but I figured, he's probably in here somewhere, probably with a doe. It's that time of year. So long story short, I am setting up. I think I was set up at maybe 250, and by 3:30, I had killed the biggest buck I've ever shot with a bow in Michigan, and it ended up being like 172-inch 10-point. So it was, it was just one of those scenarios where I had to make that call to leave an area that I knew was really good because the wind wasn't right. And then I drove, 33 miles to this other spot, had another spot in mind where the wind was perfect. But I came across that hot sign, and when I say hot, it was hot. Like it was, probably that it was just a couple hours maybe before I was there, and was able to set up on it because I always kind of have I'm very mobile, so I always have a few little pre-steps and my mobile stand, ready to go, in case something like that happens. And then it happened on that day, and I set up on it, and it paid off on my biggest buck ever.
Man, that's awesome. That's a really great illustration of a lot of those things you've talked about. Joe,
Yeah.
do you wanna try to wrap it up with one more story here for us?
Yeah, sure. I've got a lot of stories. I know we could go round and round for another 6 hours. So I'll tell a story of a buck I shot a couple of years ago on public land. I've shot bigger bucks, but this buck, I don't know, I plain outsmarted him, just outwitted him, and that feels pretty good when you do that. And anyway, this buck was feeding on an alfalfa field all summer long. I had a camera soaking on one side of the field months of August and September. I was kind of just doing some low impact scouting before the season, checked the camera, and it was right on the field edge. And there was this really big 9-pointer coming in, huge body. He had average antler. I mean, real nice. He's 140 class, but huge hulking body. He was coming in on this side of this field, and it was in the dark. Almost all the pictures were in the dark, even in September, but it was just after dark, and he was also favoring a north and northeast winds to come into the field on that side. Well, it's on public land, and the edge of the field, or the edge of the public land, wasn't that far back from the edge of the field. It was a couple hundred yards of timber that I had for public, but I suspect I scouted all that area in the past, and I knew if he was bedding, he was probably bedding across the fence on private and then coming onto the public and then up to the field in the dark. So I had, the preferred wind condition, and I had, my guesstimated travel route from, based on, cyber scouting, looking at that private property next to the public. I mean, I figured he was bedding within 100, 150 yards of the fence. And I thought I could set up basically right next to the fence and get a chance at him in daylight. And that was month of September, season opens October 1st. I know patterns change fast. I had to get on him. So October 1st, by luck, I had the right wind. It was like a northeast wind. I slip in there. I'm 100% mobile. I haven't pre-hung a tree stand in a long time. Set up in my tree saddle. And as luck would have it, there was a guy cutting firewood like back on the private land in the general area where I thought that buck was bedding. He never showed. And this spot, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's kind of a bottleneck. There's several fence crossings on the side of a ridge where they're coming from the private, down the ridge, up ultimately to the alfalfa field. I had to cover everything. I was set up right in the middle of stuff, kind of going for broke. Stuff that was coming past me could smell me behind me, but that's where I had to be to get the shot. Well, I got out that October 1st hunt. He didn't show. I did see a little buck, I think, and a doe, but got out of there, and just part of me, my gut said, and this is where, it's important to listen to your gut. My gut said, it's worth hunting that spot again. So a week later, October 7th, I had the exact same wind, and I went in there, but I did not pick the same tree. I figured that buck was kind of a homebody in there all the time. He would smell my ground scent, and if he was going to probably adjust his travel route to be coming past downwind, further downwind. So I moved about 30 yards is all. That's all I could move, and now it's like 20 yards from the fence line. Sure enough, he came in. It was perfect. He came in, hopped the fence. He was probably 5 to 10 feet from smelling me, and he was a full 50 yards downwind of my original setup. He would have smelled me, and I would have never gotten a shot if I hadn't adjusted that set on that second sit. And I don't know. I'm big about how the kill goes down. I guess for me, like I really take a high. I take a lot of pride in like a quick, clean kill. And I shot that deer through the top of the heart. He had no clue what hit him. He like hopped about 15 yards, stood, and then he just went straight down, like just boom, dead, And I still remember that, and I don't know, between just plain outwitting him. He thought he had, he knew there was a hunter in the area, but he figured, well, I can sneak through, and if there's a guy up there trying to kill me, I'll smell him. I know deer can't think, but, he was avoiding my first set. I'm certain of it. And he thought, and I guessed right. I made the shot, and, he was dead. He had no clue what hit him. And it just, I love that feeling. So.
Man. That is a great story, and as we've been doing this, I have just been getting more and more and more amped to get back in the woods and start scouting, or keep scouting, start hunting again. This is what it's all about. You guys are an inspiration. As cheesy as that sounds, you guys are inspiring me right now. This is just exciting stuff. There's been a lot here I think people can learn from. You guys have set an awesome example, and you've shared so much, and I just appreciate it. So we're going to have to do something like this more in the future, and until then, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thanks you guys. It was a pleasure talking with all of you. It's really great to converse back and forth with guys of your caliber. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. So, do it again. Give me a call. So.
Yeah, it's same here.
It'll be at your house.
Yeah, yeah. It's been a good time. I look up to both of these guys. They're both very motivating and obviously great hunters. And thanks for having me too, Mark.
Hey, my pleasure. Someday, I hope
I was
going to say, someday I hope I can stand in your company as an equal. I'm working on
it. I would point out really quick, how people conduct themselves is important. A lot of people out there kill big bucks. Then there's lots of ways to kill big bucks. And, pardon my French, but if you turn it into a dick measuring contest, I don't have any time for that, So,
right.
I like how people, I like both the way both of you, you're classy about it. There's always something more to learn. You never arrogant about it. And that kind of thing speaks for itself, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, well said. I agree with that as well. And the interesting thing, I don't know if you guys were, but mentally, as you guys are talking, I'm thinking about what you're saying. And I think if you notice, all of the guys, the other guys, anytime somebody was speaking, the wheels were turning. These guys are definitely students at no matter what level they're at. They're computing what I'm saying and computing what each other's saying, and agreeing or adding to it. And to get to the next level, that's the mindset you have to have, and that's why these guys are successful. They get it, and when somebody's speaking, they're listening. And I've learned a lot from brilliant guys. I've learned a lot from really stupid guys that are stupid hunters that kill the giant. And I think to myself, how did he kill it? Well, he killed it because he did something stupid that I would never think of doing. And you learn from that. And these guys are students of the game, and they're learning from everybody around them.
That's a great point. I would just mention, I like reading North American Whitetail, their big buck profiles or whatever they call, because a lot of them are complete blind luck. This guy killed a 240-inch non-typical, but it's it's luck, but it's not luck. He just happened to choose that spot. He walked into the woods randomly as a meat hunter, and he had this giant buck. I look behind the scenes of the story, and all these things are they're first time sits, or the guy's not mucking up the spot with checking his trail camera every 3 days or 7 days.
True.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
That's such a good point.
You can learn something from everybody.
That's right. Yep.
All right, guys.
We'll have to definitely do this again. There's so many other things we can keep talking about.
Yeah, we've only scratched the surface. That's for sure. I feel there's 1,000 more questions I'd like to ask and topics to cover, but next time. And there you go. Our 200th episode is in the books. And like I said, I think it was at the end of last episode, thank you guys for making this all possible. It's been a heck of a ride, and really looking forward to where we can take things next. That said, I've kept you here a long, long time. I think this is our longest episode ever, so we'll shut this down here real quick. Just want to wrap it up by thanking our partners at Sitka Gear, Yeti Coolers, Matthews Archery, Maven Optics, the Whitetail Institute of North America, Trophy Ridge, and Huntera Maps. And finally, thank you all for listening. Good luck out there if you are doing some scouting or some shed hunting of your own. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.